Hi there, it's DeeJayBe, and today I'm going to be talking about APOXIE SCULPT. APOXIE SCULPT is a modeling compound heavily used for sculpture creation, building, and restoration. It's a commonly used clay in the model horse world. It is made by the company Aves Studio. You can get it on Amazon or other art websites as well. It comes in 2 parts and they have a couple of different sizes depending on how much you need for your projects. I have the 2-pound containers, which is quite a bit, but if you're working with traditional models, I definitely recommend getting more. It doesn't go to waste. It ranges from around $8 to $155 depending on how much you get. There's a variety of different colors that it comes in. I personally like to use the natural color. It comes in 2 separate containers, part A and part B, and you have to mix both of them together in order for it to activate. When you mix the clays together, you have about 1 to 3 hours to work with it, and it cures 100% in 24 hours. It doesn't shrink, it doesn't crack, it's hard and durable, waterproof. You can drill into it and sand it. It's pretty much the ultimate tool for model horse customizing and original sculpture work. When you mix it together, it works really well with water. When you sculpt anything, it smooths it right out when you add water over top. I always keep a jar of water when working with my epoxy in a separate jar from my paint, and then I like to keep a paper towel on hand to dab my tools and catch the drips of excess water. I've heard of artists having success with denatured alcohol, so I have some isopropyl alcohol. I've tried it before. I don't find it much different from water, but that's something that I'm looking into researching more. Even though it says on the container, wear gloves when you're using it, the best tool with this clay is honestly your hands. You get the best results just by smoothing with your fingers. That's personally my go-to tool. I just went to the dollar store and picked up some really cheap synthetic paintbrushes, and you're going to need some of these for smoothing out. They don't need to be super soft, the water kind of does enough. I like to keep an X-Acto knife around. It's always a good tool to have on hand. I find these needlepoint tools really useful as well for fine details. I have a plethora of sculpting tools. I don't find I use them very much, but there'll be times when you need a certain shape. If you're going to use these kind of tools, I recommend only getting a metal base or plastic based tool. Wood is not ideal. The epoxy tends to stick to it. Metal embossing tools, it's just a tool with 2 different sized balls on either end. You can get various sizes. Oil paint eraser, I'm not sure what the context is on that. It's kind of a firm rubber tool. I like to use this flat edge one for blending out seams when attaching epoxy to a model. Now, my favorite tools in the whole world for epoxy are these wax-based sculpting tools, and I'll put some links in the description. They come in lots of different shapes, but honestly, the only shapes that I find myself using at all are the pointed one. These are pretty much the only 2 tools I tend to use, and I have them in 2 different sizes. This is the similar texture to your hand, to your fingerprint, so it's really easy to use them, especially the small one. You can get into those tiny nooks and crevices that your finger just can't. I have the 2-pound containers of epoxy, and I find the containers' lids don't seal very well, so just for extra precaution, I keep them stored in a Ziploc bag so that they don't dry out. This is the part A, and it's quite a sticky, ooey gooey mess. It's a bit of a darker color. It's very tacky to the touch. Part B is firmer to the touch and a lighter gray color. So I like to mix a little bit, and then I can always mix more if I need more. Because if you mix too much and you're unable to use it in the 1 to 3 hours, you're just gonna end up throwing it away. Rolling each part in your palm into a little ball. You might want to knead the mixture a little bit to wake it up. I definitely find that with part B, it needs some extra kneading just to get it warm and ready to go. So once you roll out both of your parts, you're just going to want to compare the sizes, and the sizes of your little balls should be the same. This is the best way to make sure that you have equal parts. If you don't have equal parts, you're going to run into issues. So then you're just going to knead it in between your fingers. On the container, it says for 2 minutes. You want it to be a little bit tacky, but not overtly sticky. You're going to want to make sure you have no streaks or no lines running through it to make sure that it's evenly mixed. And by the time you're finished with it, it's going to turn into that nice nice neutral color that it's supposed to be. The best thing when using tools with this clay is making sure that they're nice and damp. Now these little wax tools work really well because you can dip them in some water and kind of dab it off a little bit, and it just makes them damp and they kind of hold the water quite well so that you can make easy lines through your clay. In this demonstration, I'm showing what it looks like to use a dampened waxed tool through the clay. It glides really smoothly and makes a really smooth crease. If you make a crease with no water, you're going to get some flaking and some chipping on the outside. I'm going to give a bit of a demonstration on this Iwata custom I've been working on, which I'm going to add some wrinkles to his shoulder blade. He's pretty much all been redone in epoxy. You can see that his rib cage is a little bit of a different color. When the epoxy completely cures, it darkens up and it all matches. So the first thing is you don't want to use too much epoxy when applying to a large area because it's really easy to overly add a blob of this stuff. It needs to be a really thin layer when you're just working on the surface like I am here, because I'm just adding extra muscle texture on the surface. I'm not actually filling in any gaps or making original sculpture. So I just apply that with my thumb, really asserting the pressure. You have to push quite hard and make sure the edges are blended. The edges are really important when using epoxy because when you prime the model, you don't want any funky seams, and you're really going to see those seams if you don't push the edges of your clay really down into the model so that it blends out nicely. So this works best with just some pressure on my finger, and I will wet it occasionally just so that the clay doesn't break away, because it will break away if your hand isn't damp. It's just a lot of working it through and making it the right shape with my thumb. My thumb is my favorite tool. When running the tool through the clay, I make sure that it is nice and damp, and you can pretty much just draw on lines like you would with a pencil. You don't need to stagger them. You want to go semi-slowly so that you don't get any weird fraying from the clay. And then I like to run my finger over it with some water and run my finger through the seams to soften them a little bit, because you're going to have a hard edge when you run the tool through, and then later we'll run the paintbrush over it. So epoxy is a lot of trial and error. I've been working with it for many years and I'm still learning every time I pick it up. I recommend starting on a few practice projects first, just applying some to the surface of a model or the surface of something and just kind of working with it, playing with it a little bit, and then running some primer over it and seeing what happens, because a lot of times when you're sculpting and then you think you're done and you run some primer over it, you realize all of your seams are bumpy and you can totally see where you've added the epoxy and it looks all wrong. Check your work as you go, and you can do that by just using some primer. And I find that the model can get sometimes quite sticky and you can get a lot of excess epoxy fallout throughout, so you can dab it up with a paper towel and whatnot. I will be posting some refined tutorials later on how to sculpt certain attributes of model horses. All the links for the tools used in this video are in the description below. Thanks for watching and happy sculpting!